Ange Bell, welcome to the Undraped Artist Podcast.
Hiya, Jeff. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So I haven't known about your work for very long, but when I discovered it, I was quite enamored with it. I mean, you're an exceptional painter, and I don't know if you're familiar with my work, but I do portraits as well. So naturally, I'm drawn to what you do. And but one of the things we'll talk about your work later. I want to learn about you first, but I just got to tell you right off the bat, one of the things that I absolutely love about your work is you've got a really unique painterly painting style. That sounds really redundant. The way you apply paint is really unique. You have really interesting brushwork. So I'm anxious to learn a little bit about where that came from. But first, I kind of want to learn about you, how you got into painting, just a little bit about your background.
Sure. Well, thank you for the lovely compliments. This is going to go well if I start something to go by. Um, yeah, so where to start? I guess I was always that kid that was drawing. Um, and even though art has always been my main concern, everything centered around art, it was never really viewed as a kind of viable career option. So even though I studied art, went on to university and studied a degree in fine art and then a master's in fine art, I specialized in sculpture. Um, and I wasn't really sure of where to go with it, possible career directions. And of course, whenever you come out as a student, you've got whopping great debt. So yeah, I went and did proper jobs. I was a teacher for a while. I spent most of my time being a youth worker.
Hmm.
And then it was only whenever my son started primary school that I had the opportunity then to work part-time and get into the studio.
Really? So why did you
Mhm.
study art if you didn't feel like it was a viable career option?
I knew what I didn't want to do, and I didn't want to get a proper job. And I was really lucky at high school. I had a teacher, Jane Mainley, and she basically said, "You're going to art college," and convinced my parents that that was the route to take. And so that's why that opportunity came about. And so I just ran with it. But I really didn't have, I think, I don't know, I think a lot of people who are my age, especially in Ireland as well, art wasn't necessarily a career option, but it was something people were allowed to do for a certain length of time.
Hmm.
And
Wait, what
so
do you
I was
mean? What do you
afforded that
mean by that? For a
opportunity.
certain length of time?
So yeah, you got to study art, but then you were expected to go and be a proper adult afterwards and have a serious job and do the 9 to 5.
So everyone in
I
art
think,
school in Ireland, this is where you're from, Ireland, I'm assuming?
yeah.
Okay, so everyone that you knew in Ireland that was in art school with you, they just assumed that this was their time to play and
Mm.
live their dreams out while they're in school, but they all fully intended to get a job afterwards and not be
Yeah,
a
I
painter.
think Yeah, I think people in the graphics department or the textile department, it was different. You had
Yeah.
job prospects. I think out of the people that I went to university with, there is one who's regarded as a serious artist and has a brilliant reputation in Ireland, and one that does I would just say like community art, so works with different say a school or a youth center, or different age groups, and yeah, carries out different projects. But other than that, there's nobody that I've, was in my cohort that has made it big.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't think there was an expectation that they would, which is really weird.
Yeah. I mean,
I
I'm trying to
mean,
think
whenever
back to my college years. Do you mind me asking when you were born?
1975,
Oh, we're about the
so a
same
wee while
age.
ago.
I was born in 74. So we're
Ah,
pretty much the same age. So I know what
mm,
you mean. And I have a similar experience in that, as far as I know, I'm the only artist doing it full time that I graduated
Mm.
with. I didn't graduate, but everyone else graduated and I went on to do it full time. But but I don't remember anyone feeling like it was just a step to get, or just like, this is my time to paint and then I will get a job. I feel like when I was in
Mm.
school, everyone believed they would become a painter. It just didn't happen. So that's what I find interesting, is that the mentality was a little bit different. Even though we followed the
Yeah.
same trajectory, it was, you guys were a little more realistic, maybe. Uh,
I think maybe we just weren't encouraged to dream.
maybe. So how did your teacher in high school convince your parents to let you study art? Was it partly because of that culture where you get to do this thing for a time and then you get a serious job?
I think I'm the only artist in the family, so there wasn't anybody that had gone before me to prove whether this was going to be a disastrous route or, a highly successful route. So, I got to be the one that ventured out alone into into the art world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I think because one, I'm so stubborn, but two, my teacher said, well, actually, this is what she's really good at. And how can you not let her have a crack at it, basically?
Hmm.
So I owe her a hell of a lot.
Yeah.
Um, I think my parents were really worried, but I also think that they just thought, well, she's going to be a real pain if we don't let her do what she wants to do. So they
Yeah.
maybe went for the easy route. But so everybody in your cohort then thought they were going to be
Well, I mean, I
successful
can't get in all their heads,
artists.
but I think that the people that I hung out with in college, I think we
Mm.
all expected to at least try. I mean, I don't think any of us planned on getting a job afterwards. Let me put it that way. But I also think that most of us recognized that it was going to be hard, if not impossible, you
Mm.
know? But as you put it, maybe we were more dreamers. I think that the people I hung out with at least wanted to give it a shot, right? It wasn't, they didn't
Mm.
see it as just their time to play. And
Mm.
then just once they're done, it's just inevitable. It's time to get the grown up job. And at least that's not
Mm.
how I perceived my friends to think. But who knows, really? I don't know that we ever really talked about it.
But
Um,
did you see what I found interesting? I was just having a chat with Tom Senna, who does the Drop podcast, and I was speaking to his group of students recently. And, I was saying, oh my God, I don't think I ever had any career advice elements to my whole time at uni. I don't think anybody sat me down and went, you're actually going to need some maths so that you can balance your books. You're going to have to be an accountant. You're going to have to be a salesperson,
oh, no, we never
you
got
know.
that either.
So I think that's maybe I'm having a bit more of a negative view on it, but I just thought nobody treated it like it was going to be a career,
No, my
you know?
teachers, this seems like a contradiction, but my teachers all told us it wasn't possible.
Mm.
But I don't know, maybe it's just the people that I hung out with in school. Maybe we were just the dreamers. Maybe it wasn't the school culture. Maybe it was just the
Mm.
few friends I had in college that we all were optimistic. I don't know. But yeah, my teachers would always tell us, no, you can't make it in this field. You can't make it. It's not possible. But that's because they weren't
Mm.
making it in the field, right? They were teaching at a
Yeah.
university and not selling paintings on the side and just painting as a hobby. And so
Mm.
their perspective was that art wasn't possible as a career. That was their perspective. That was their reality. So I understand why they would tell
Mm.
us that. But um, the few of us that I remember hanging out with, we for some reason had this idea that we would be the exception.
I mean,
So I
don't
don't
get
know.
me wrong, we all thought we were great, we're so
Yeah.
wrapped up in our own delight, but it never occurred to us, that
Yeah,
we could
that's
actually make
interesting.
money and have a career.
Yeah. Yeah. So when your kids started in primary school and then
Mm.
you started working part time and painting,
Mm.
at what point did it start to feel like a viable career where you actually are like, wow, I can actually make some money doing this?
I don't think it was even about the money. Basically, I look at my my life now at this ripe old age and reflect back at different times, and I just think what I've done at different stages of my life. I mean, the masters, I was definitely buying myself time. I bought myself time to create and to have great experiences in art. And then I look at the time whenever my son started school and I was working part-time and then being around for him, but also I just thought, well, actually, this is bought time now. I'm working part-time. I'm giving up the potential to have a full-time job to be
Mm-hmm.
with my son for the times that he's around, but also I have to make use of this extra bonus time that I
Mm-hmm.
have. So it wasn't necessarily about making money. I saw it as kind of bought time to do something great, to kind of feed my soul a little bit. And I didn't think, well, this is a return to the art world or anything grand like that. Or even that money could be made from it. I just knew that it was an important part of my life. I think because I dipped in and out of art for so many years, I didn't really continue on my practice because I had to earn money and pay off student debts and do all
Mm-hmm.
those other important life things. That yeah, I just saw it as a treat.
Yeah. Well, I don't think any of us do it for money, or we would have done something else.
Yeah.
But I guess what, well, and I'm not. That's not to say you can't make money. What I mean
Mm,
is, the whole world tells you it's not practical, as we just talked about. So why would you
yeah.
choose it if you were thinking about making good money?
Mm,
But you've obviously accomplished some things, because I was reading on Instagram on your bio that you're part of the Royal Institute of Oil Painters and the Royal Society of Painters, and your work is magnificent. So you must be having experiencing some success. Well, I guess so. Not so much about it's when I say when did you realize you could make money at this? What I'm really asking is, when did you realize that this could be more than just a hobby to fill your time? Or
mm.
is that still primarily what it is?
Oh no, no. I mean, the that was in the early days.
Right.
And yeah, just to correct you, so I'm a member of the Contemporary British Portrait Painters, but the Royal Institute of Oil Painters, or all that, all the ones listed there, they've all been past shows that I've taken part in.
Oh, okay,
So the
gotcha.
Royal Academy Summer Exhibition, that.
Still,
But
still awesome. Yeah.
yeah. Ah, thanks. um, yeah, so I think that it it took a couple of years because I hadn't painted before. So it took me a couple of years um to get to grips with paint and to
Wait a minute. So
understand
you
what I
didn't
was
paint in
doing.
college? In
No,
university? What did oh
no.
you
So I painted
sculpted. You
for,
sculpted, that's right.
yeah. So I
Oh.
think I spent about a week in the paint department because I was just chomping at the bit to get back into the sculpture,
So why did you go
the
to
sculpture
paint when your
department.
kid went to school? Why not just pick up sculpture where you left off?
Well, I think that fits in with the idea of it being bonus time. I'd spent many years making sculpture and I love sculpture. I think it's fantastic. But I saw it as, the bonus time. So I thought, what haven't I done before?
Oh.
What's going to be interesting or exciting? And I thought, well, I haven't painted. So yeah, just took it from there. And so I looked at YouTube videos, books, looked at people's art that I really liked and thought, how on earth did they do that? And then went and had a crack at it.
So you're basically self-taught.
Yeah.
I mean, none of us are really self-taught because you learned from a YouTube video, but you self-directed teaching.
Mm, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that's fed into my style mainly because I haven't had, a very rigid painting background. I think I tend to be a bit more experimental and irreverent in my approach.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure some proper painters would be horrified with,
Oh, I
with
want to
how
hear
I
more about
approach
what is
things.
improper about your work in a bit here. Let's not forget that. I want to know about the improper. Uh, so tell me about your life now. You said it took a little while.
Mm.
Are you working part-time still as a painter now? Are you working full-time? I mean, what's your
Oh,
parent situation?
yeah, no, so I've been full time for quite a number of years now. Um, And it happened gradually, but also it was my realization that actually I could make it my full-time job,
Mm-hmm.
next to parenting. And yeah, so I always have a couple of different work streams on the go at the same time. So I have, you know, my commission work, the portraits. I have
Which you must have a
more,
bunch because your Instagram says closed for commissions.
yeah,
So you're pretty backed up.
yeah. So I just every now and again I open them, um, and then close them pretty quickly
That's amazing.
because
Congratulations.
yeah. Well, thank you, but it's a double-edged sword. One, I really love working on the commissions, and they help me fund the rest of my practice, but it's also time away from the work that you're really driven to create,
Mm-hmm.
where your ideas are, where you can really experiment and throw everything at it. um but yeah, so I like the commission work, but also I'm quite a lot more balanced in my approach now, shall we say. So I'm not going to take on a year's worth of work. I just think that's lunacy for me anyway.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a whole big pile of stress. And so I open it up so that I've maybe got 3-4 months of work at a time, and then close it again. I just think, yeah, it's a lot less stressful. And then of course and in parallel with that is the gallery work. Um, which, yeah, this year that's the focus. And then the affordable pieces on Instagram, people go, "Oh, you should be charging more for that." And I think you don't understand my business model. This
Yeah.
isn't. I'm not. I'm not a hobby painter. This is my job. I'm a professional artist, and I take it seriously. And what these affordable pieces are basically calling cards. I've had many people that have bought the little 5 by 10 pieces. Most people will be quite comfortable in spending, a couple of £100 on something, on a piece of art that they've only seen on a screen. You push them over the £500 mark, the £1,000 mark, and people aren't going to go for it. But if they buy a little piece of your work and they take that punt, then they realize the quality and the standard of work, and then they're more likely to return for commissions, or then buy the bigger pieces of art later on. So
That did you
it's a
come up with
business
that
model.
on your own, that business plan? That's
It
brilliant.
kind of Yeah, it kind of developed, and I just thought, I've had time to work this out,
Yeah.
and I just need to figure out what works for me. Um, I need to be excited about going into the studio. I want to create the work that I want to create. I also need to make a living, but you know, it should all be a joyful thing.
Hmm. Well, because the reason I find that brilliant is because I've interviewed so many people that make their living
Mm,
on social media practically.
mm,
And it's fascinating to me because it's so different than my career. Whereas mine, I sell like one painting a year, and that's my
mm.
whole career because they're big and like I'm working on a 10-footer right now. And so it's such a different thing. And I'm like, I can't even imagine selling something like this on Instagram. Like, who would look at a picture of one of my paintings and then drop that amount of money on Instagram? And what you're telling me is you've kind of worked the system a little bit. You're like, no, that's not what you
Mm.
do. What you do is you sell them the
Yeah,
little stuff, you convert them, and then they trust that your work is good in person. Then they spring for the big stuff. That's brilliant. I've never would have thought of that.
yeah. But
Yeah.
then also, yeah, I mean, it's yeah, as an artist, as a professional who is out in their own, you have to figure this stuff out. You have to make things work for you. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Full
Yeah.
stop. But also, your paintings take, you're talking about a 10 foot piece of, piece of work, and you just think, well, how many of my little ones would fit into that one piece of yours? So,
Oh
and you're
yeah, a
probably
lot.
spent about a year creating that work, aren't you? Yours
Yeah.
are
No, it takes a
incredibly
year. Yeah.
detailed.
Yeah.
Mm,
Wow, that's really interesting. And
mm,
I'm definitely going to have my students listen to this because I was just having a conversation with them. And as you know, because we're the same age,
mm,
it's changed so much since when I left school in 2002, which is late for someone born in 74. I was kind of a late bloomer, but I
mm,
left school in 2002 and started my career. And it was just, there was no social media. My whole exposure to art outside of what was local in local galleries and museums
mm,
was Barnes and Noble. And I can think of just a handful of living artists. Like there was an Odd Nerdrum book and maybe a David
mm,
LaFell book on the shelf in Barnes and Noble. So my whole view of the world outside of Salt Lake City and dead artists
mm.
was Odd Nerdrum and David LaFell. Like, like they're the only other realists living on the planet. The point I'm getting to is back then it was just you paint a painting and all you could do was put it in a gallery and they sell it. That's it.
Mm.
Now my students are graduating and they have so many options for a career. It's ridiculous. And they're like, so how do you make a career in this, Jeff? I'm like, I mean, I know how I did it. I don't know how you're going to do it. You're going to have to get creative. I mean, if you asked me 20 years ago, I would have told you there's only one way to do it. But now there's like 1,000 different business plans that are
Mm.
possible with the technology that's out there now. And you've just told us one of them. So that's great.
But isn't that so exciting? I think that's why so many artists, that we went to uni with, didn't make it because it was you painted something, you put it in a gallery, and it sold, or it didn't, and then you were out.
Right.
You didn't make it into that little kind of art loop of who was successful in your community and your neighborhood at the time. And I just think, that the way young people now I'm sounding really old. The way the way
Those
young
whippersnappers.
artists, yeah, those whippersnappers now. The way young artists are approaching things, some of them have a huge amount of followers on Instagram. They're not dependent on the degree or that one gallery. They've
Hmm.
got so many options open to them, and I think that's incredibly exciting. And I think, you develop different skill sets when you work with what you're given with, and I think we worked in different ways with what we were given, but at the same time, everything that is available to young artists now is just so exciting, but also it's an absolute minefield because you have to be good at everything.
Yeah, I
You've
don't
got
like
to be
it.
good at.
I'm less optimistic. Yeah.
But also I think it means also that your work is not necessarily more disposable, but I think you've a lot more competition, and also, there are various different trends, and if your work fits in with whatever's happening this month, then great, you're in. But if it doesn't fit the look of what's happening next month, then you're out.
Let me just take a minute to plug my sponsor, Rosemary Brushes. These are not Rosemary brushes. I'm a brush junkie. So when I go to an art supply store, I have to admit, on occasion, I will be tempted to buy a brush, even though it's not from Rosemary. But it's rare. And here's the reason why it's rare because this is what happens to other brands. This is basically a new brush. I bought it last summer. And this one right here, a good brand, supposedly, the hairs are literally coming right out. This brand, also a well known brand, got this last year. Already the ferrule busted off. Now I could glue it on, but why should I have to glue it on? Brushes are expensive. This needs to be crimped better. So, why do I love Rosemary brushes? Two reasons. One, because they're an amazing company and their brushes are freaking high quality. This brush from Rosemary is a good example. It's gorgeous, it's tight, it's well made, and it'll last forever if you take care of it. The other reason is because Rosemary is an amazing family owned company. They provide amazing service. They're awesome people to work with, and you can't go wrong by buying their product. So for your next painting, head over to rosemaryandco.com and pick up some more brushes. Yeah.
So I think it's got its own drawbacks, but I definitely think it's exciting.
I wonder if there is more competition. I don't know. I'm not disagreeing with you, but I've thought a lot about this because I genuinely don't know. There's two ways of looking at that in my mind. There's more competition because more artists have access to the public through social media.
Mm,
So you might think there's more competition between artists because we're all so easily accessible.
mm,
But another way of looking at it is what's happening is galleries are the ones that are feeling it, not so much the artists. I mean, because now the galleries have to compete with the artists more than the artist has to compete with the artist in my mind. Because there's always been
mm.
artists out there. It's just that if I wanted to see a Nashville artist, I had to go to Nashville. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But now the gallery in Nashville that would have been waiting for me to show up and look at a Nashville artist, now they have to freak out because I can just Google Nashville artist
Mm.
and or look on Instagram for artists in Nashville. Not that I don't know why I would do that, but you get my point. And so I kind of wonder if it really is so much a competition thing that we need to concern ourselves with, or not. I don't know.
I think all with regards to the galleries, I think the whole pandemic, I know over in the UK, it definitely shifted the whole gallery experience.
Mm-hmm.
I think because everything went online, then it really did shift. And I think in some respects it's got rid of the lazy galleries who, would take their cut and go, thanks very much, and not really put a lot of effort into um, promoting your work outside of their actual physical space. And I think now that people are able to do it themselves, yeah,
Yeah.
the good ones are surviving. I work with a couple of really great galleries who you know they're working for you, and it might not necessarily result in sales, but you know that they're excited by your work, they're promoting your work, they're introducing your work to a new audience. And that's fun. That's worth the money. Let's face it, I've exhibited with a gallery recently and made the sale, and then they took 50% and the VAT on top. And that wasn't taken into consideration, me framing the work and then, couriering the work back and forward. And you just think it's
So much money.
ridiculous. I know. And I also think I didn't see my work heavily promoted by them. So why am I paying you that money?
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's why I think galleries are the ones who are really suffering right now. Not so much. I kind of wonder if this accessibility that we all have is actually helping each of us because it's raising awareness for in the case of artists like you and I for the relevance of realism, let's say,
Mm,
and how popular it is. You know, you see the following of all these realists on Instagram, and it gives legitimacy to them. So in a
mm,
way, it kind of bolsters all of us. And the only one left is the people who used to represent us and talk us up to give us credit. We don't necessarily need that kind of
mm.
bolstering from the gallery anymore. You know, there's a
True.
funny story. Oh my gosh, this cracks me up. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So there's a museum here in the Salt Lake area that they own a couple pieces of my work, and we were visiting the museum, me and my students, and it's great because it's called the Springville Museum of Art. I'll give them a plug. They're a beautiful museum in this beautiful Spanish building about 50 miles from Salt Lake City. And they have this great Russian collection that's just gorgeous. And then they have lots of other beautiful work from various places, but it's mostly focused on Russian. But then they also have tons of local Utah artists in there and
Mm,
really some really stellar work. So we're there looking at all this collection, and they have this one hall that's portraits, and it's portraits or self portraits of artists from Utah from way back the 1800s, which in Ireland is like yesterday, but to us that's a long way back. But and I'm walking through this hallway, and I say to my students, "I want to get my self portrait in here." I mean, how cool would that be to be one of the artists on there? So one of my students, who's older than me, and I say that because, it wasn't a kid walking up to the desk. So she looked serious. She just took it upon herself. I didn't even know. She took it upon herself to find the director of the museum and say, "Hey, you should have a Jeff HEIN self portrait in here." So this is what's hilarious. So the director of the museum called and emailed her as though she were my representative and started trying to set up meetings to meet with her about a quote unquote acquiring a Jeff HEIN self portrait. And and then she's like, as she said, she, kind of told me about it and thought it was humorous. And I emailed them and said, "Hey, I found out you want one of my self portraits. Let's talk about it." And then they emailed her again and said, "Hey, it sounds like Jeff's interested. Let's set up a meeting." They're totally going around me to get to her. And I just find it hilarious how easy it is. She just basically became my rep and didn't even try. It's
That's
like,
fantastic,
it's
though.
serious. She didn't even try. All she did was go, "Hey, you should have a Jeff HEIN art." And all of a sudden she's got a business dealing my art. Like, it just happened that
That is
easy.
fantastic.
It's hilarious.
What's her cut, though?
I know, no. Fortunately, she's not going to ask for one. But I just find it interesting how easy it is. If the art is good, how easy it is to just go up to somebody and say, "Hey, you should have X," and then take 50%. You know what I mean? Anyway, totally. I mean, I guess it's related, but it just, when you were talking about how much you have to do, putting the frame on, shipping it, painting it, and then splitting it right down the middle, it just, it reminded me of that, because it just reminded me of how easy it would have been for her if she wasn't a friend to just go, "Hey, I just earned 50% by walking up to the desk and saying, 'Hey, you should have a Jeff HEIN painting.'"
Exactly.
It's crazy.
She's great, though. Send me on her
Oh
details
my gosh,
after.
I kind of want to hire her, actually, because she must have I mean, it must be her face or something. I don't know.
But isn't it, doesn't it go, I always kind of remind myself, I've got little phrases that I use as little prompts in life. And one of the ones is, if you don't ask, you don't get. And
Hmm.
it's really true. And I don't know why more of us don't. I mean,
Yeah.
is that typical?
I don't know. I kind of wonder if it would have been different if I had gone up and said, "Hey, you should have one of my
Mm,
portraits." If somehow
mm.
her walking up as my representative legitimized me in some way.
Yeah.
That would
Like you
be an
have
interesting
staff.
social experiment, to get 10 artists and 10 random people and have them walk up to some significant collector or museum and just see
Mm,
if there's a difference between when the artist walks up and requests it and when a rep of the artist walks up and requests it.
mm.
If there is a difference,
Yeah.
that would be an
Because
interesting
like in,
experiment.
but did you have also, I mean, I certainly did. In the early part of my career, it was like, God forbid you ever approach a gallery by yourself, you know. It
Yeah.
was like you have to contact them, go, "Sorry, sorry to bother you, you know, and would you mind looking at this?" And you had to go and be really humble and
Hmm.
tap them
That
on
was
the
the
shoulder
rule.
quietly.
But are you familiar with Joseph Todorovich?
No, no.
Okay, so he's a California-based artist. I actually interviewed him. So if you're interested in learning about him, I
Mm,
interviewed him maybe a year ago, and he's an exceptional painter. Well, frankly, I think everyone I interview is, or I wouldn't interview him. But he's another one of the exceptional painters I've interviewed, and his story is really interesting because he's I wouldn't call him shy, but he's one of those people that thinks a lot, speaks little. Like,
mm,
he's very articulate, but he's not a loud person. He's very
mm,
reserved, and at least that's my impression of him. Maybe he'll correct me on that, but I've spent some time with him, and that's how I perceive him. But uh, he and I are about the same age as well, and I was in this gallery in Laguna Beach, California, and the dealer told me about how Joseph Todorovich approached him, because we ended up in the same gallery at about the same time, except I got in there in a different way than he did. That's not related. But
mm.
my dealer said that Joseph Todorovich came in with a painting under his arm, and that he, the dealer, was really pissed off because that's not how it's done. In quotes, that's not how it's done. You got to follow the process, as you put it. And Joseph comes off as this. He's not a big guy either. He's maybe like 5'8", 5'9", lean.
Mm.
Not a big guy. And so, and my dealer is like 6'2", 230 pound, major presence of a man. And so you just got, I'm just describing them because you got to imagine this whole scenario, right? This little guy with a painting under his arm, this pissed off 230-pound, intimidating art dealer is like, get out of my gallery kind of attitude toward him. I don't know if he actually said that, but that's what he said he felt like to me.
Mm.
And he did tell him, this is not what you do. You want to come in the gallery, you have to send your work in, and or something to that effect. And then Joe just turned his painting around, and the dealer mouth dropped wide open, and they had a deal that fast. It was like, yeah, that's not the process unless you really want the art, right? And so he broke the rules and won on that one. So yeah, but I get
Nice.
what you're saying. But I always tell my students, I'm like, hey, if your work's good enough, what are they going to do? Turn you away and say, no,
Mm.
you're amazing, but you didn't follow the process. See ya. So I always tell them, just walk in anyway, just break the process. But I hope that's not bad
Yeah.
advice.
But also sometimes rules are made to be broken, aren't they?
Hmm.
I think if you play it safe and just trundle along and do the same thing, same thing as everybody else, then you're going to get the same results as most people, which
Yeah.
is a no.
Yeah.
So you got to lose.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. Okay, so before we get into your art, tell me, I'm anxious to do that, but tell me a little bit more what your life is like today. What are your studio habits like? What does a week look like in your life as a painter?
Um, so at the minute, I am between studios. We moved to the countryside about a year ago, and we have been living in a building site ever since. So it's a really good job I work small. So I've got a little desk set up, and little workspace which works perfectly well. So yeah, I have eyes on a conversion, but I think it's going to take a bit of time to get that set up. But so, yeah, so I work from home, which is great. And yeah, I just see the kids off in the morning, get stuck straight into it. And I think because in the early days, I got used to painting around the kids. So I would do the school drop off, come back, and then I knew I had that window of opportunity until like 2:30, 3 o'clock, whenever I had to go and pick them up. So I got into the habit of using my evenings then to prime boards, or just sit and contemplate what I want to do, what I want to achieve, where I'm going to go with things, how I'm going to plan out my week. And I've kept those habits up then, so I basically know what roughly my week is going to look like. um and either I'll so I've got my Monday to Friday, and that's definite studio time. So I'll either divide it up into commission work, or maybe I'm working towards an exhibition. Or last year I was focused on trying to get my work out there as much as possible. So I had lots of the little pieces, and that was basically just to, yeah, get my work out there, get it seen. It was Instagram friendly, which means that you get the engagement. Um, but this year, so I've had a bit of an easy start this year. I've decided not to do the new year, new me and traumatize myself, kind
Hmm.
of belly flop into the year. So I've been planning out what I want to focus on, looking for references, priming up a few things. So it's been quite easy this week. But next week, there are a few deadlines coming up for open submissions. Um, so, yeah, that's what I'm going to be working on.
Open
But I'm
submissions
quite
and
disciplined.
shows.
Yeah, so there's the Royal Society of Portrait Painters. They're based in the centre of London, the Mall Galleries. And so they've got, a really good reputation. I think just as much as we've been talking about Instagram, I think it's important to get your work into the reputable exhibitions and be seen by the right people and with the right people in the right environment. And so I have open submissions that I have on the calendar and that I work towards. Um, I think it's good practice to keep as many options open as possible. for me anyway.
Hmm.
But
So could you list those op? And this is a weird question, but I'm just curious because you seem like you have your hands in a lot of stuff.
mm,
So could you list some of those options? So you've said, I'll list a few of them that I've already heard. You're working on doing small paintings to get it out there through Instagram, to make the small
mhm,
sale and get people aware. You're
mhm.
entering national and I'm assuming also even international exhibitions. Is that right?
Yeah,
You're painting for galleries
yeah,
and you're working on commission work.
yeah.
Is there anything else that you're doing?
um, Parenting on the
No,
side,
I mean art related. Yeah.
um, yeah, I think no, that's basically it.
Okay.
And I think one of the joys of being self-employed is that I get to choose what I do with my day, with my week,
Hmm.
with my month. There's I know, you know, I know some people are connected to galleries and that's a great thing, but often they spend 6 months, working with a gallery for a show. And, the art market's tough out there at the minute. And some of them aren't getting the results, but they've put 6 months work in
Hmm.
and now don't have the 6 months work of worth of sales to back up the rest of their year and to back up the rest of their practice. So I think that even though mine might sound a bit hectic, and it does have its hectic moments, I think it's important to keep things moving, keep it fresh, keep looking for opportunities, and keep saying yes to things.
How do you balance
How
it
do you
though? Because
balance
I
it?
get I get so overwhelmed because mine is obviously broken up because I podcast.
Mm,
I teach. I also do, well, I stopped doing commissions. I'm done doing commissions. And then I do my own paintings. So as far as painting goes, mine's actually quite simple. I just was doing commissions and then other works. But I wasn't doing the contest thing. I wasn't doing the exhibition thing. I wasn't doing any of that. I probably should be doing that stuff, but I'm not. But even with the little bit that I'm doing, splitting commissions in my personal work, sometimes it was really hard for me to figure out what to do in the morning. I'd feel guilty if I wasn't working on the commissions. And then when I'm working on the commissions, I feel guilty because I'm not working on the other stuff. Do you ever experience
mm.
that?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So
You
how do
know,
you do it?
it's
How do you arrange your schedule so you're not constantly living in guilt for not doing the other three things?
I think that's just life though, isn't it?
Yeah, it kind of
That
sucks that
constant
way.
kind of push and pull. Um, I was listening to your podcast with John Dalton
Hmm.
and I felt exhausted by the amount of things that you've been up to. And I just thought, oh, how does he manage it? So it's really funny that you're saying that right back to me.
Yeah,
um,
well, yeah, it's hard. I'm not gonna lie, but but
but from your point of view, you have the work and you have the funding, you're making the sales and I presume through teaching that and the podcast you're able to fund your life,
yeah,
and
well, the podcast doesn't
that's
make any
really
money, just
important.
for the record. So
But
anyone who
just for
wants to
fun.
donate, please do.
But well, you should do, yeah, absolutely. um but yeah, so you do the things you want to do and then you do the things you have to do to make the money.
Yeah,
And that's why I look at it, and it's just about getting the balance right. I think, yeah, there are times where it's completely manic, and I just think, what have I signed myself up for? Or I get into the habit, because I'm quite a soft touch, I say, yeah, I'll do that, sure, no problem. Or, yeah, you've got a charity thing? Yeah, sure, no worries, I'll count me in and stuff. And then I just add on to this crazy list of things. But I think that kind of chaos and that amount of work is what keeps it fresh and fun. I
yeah,
think it sounds like we've got very different approaches. You paint large scale, detailed work that is exceptional
thank you.
over a long period of time. And I don't think I've got the attention span for that.
I don't either.
So
I just
I
suffered
like,
through it.
but I also, I'm quite envious in a way though, because I think that must be there must be a different kind of fulfillment to going into the studio and, building that piece of work, constructing it over a long period of time.
Hmm.
And I think that's something very special that you have going on with your work in practice, but also yourself as a human being.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm
That's a
envious of
special
you,
thing.
actually. But we choose our own fate. I could just
Mm,
I could switch the way I work. I don't have to work this way. I could try your business plan, but I
mm,
choose to work this way for a reason. I don't really know why. But it's funny that you should say that because on occasion I'll go plein air painting or I'll do a little portrait, and for I don't know, it's rare anymore because I've got all these big things to do,
mm,
but and there is a fix. It's like at the end of a 3 hour portrait or a three
mm,
hour landscape painting, or even a 20 hour painting, you get a quick fix, and it's like you get this relatively quick high. But with a year long painting, it never looks good until like the last week after a year. So for an entire year, you go home every day depressed because your painting still looks terrible. And then by the end of the year, it looks good, but it's been so long and you're so tired of it, it's anticlimactic. So there's no high.
mm.
So, but here's where I'm not feeling sorry for myself. Here's where the high comes when I look back a few years ahead and I get to look at what I've done and go, yeah, I did that. Then it's a different kind of a high.
Yeah.
But I love what you're doing. I kind of envy that, like these really cool, relatively small portraits, and I imagine that you get that fix fairly regularly.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, you've got it good. That's amazing.
But then it's funny that we're comparing notes because I also feel that um I'm missing out sometimes. I think, maybe if I sat with that piece longer and, worked it again and again and, considered it. But I just think naturally you find your own way of working.
Right.
And I like I like to enjoy myself in the studio.
Yeah.
It's really selfish, but I like to enjoy myself in the studio. And I just think that, I've been in quite a reflective mood of late. And I think near the end of last year, I was thinking, what am I painting and why am I painting it? And what do I want from it? What do I want from my time on this earth as well as in the studio? And so I've entered this year and I think everything's in a state of flux. Our house is being built, the world is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I've potentially got, a lot of work on. And there's so many things that I want to do that I feel torn in so many different directions. And so within my practice, I've got ideas about where I want to go. But I'm also thinking, we moved to the countryside to have a massive garden and grow veggies. And, I've got a workshop and all
Oh, that
this
sounds
stuff now. And I think,
amazing.
yeah, I want to be out there as well as in the
Yeah, that's
studio.
distracting.
But, yeah. But also there's joy to be found in other places. And I think I don't like this idea of the tortured artist. I think, why bother? If it's going to be painful, don't do it. Life's too short. Enjoy yourself. It's later than you think.
Do
Not
you
the
feel
old,
like you have a choice
the
though? I
old
mean, so,
songs.
so can you honestly say that you don't feel like a little bit of a tortured artist? Are you
Oh,
not?
don't get me wrong. I mean, I can, I think my wife would testify to, anytime like I've had a bit of a break over Christmas and, I go through the same things that, I'll take the summer off with the kids and then the return to the studio in September, I'm like, oh, I can't remember how to paint, you know, and go through this whole big crisis. And she's like, really, this happens every time. This is nothing new.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen this before, and I think, yeah, there is a bit of angst, but I also have been reflecting on the past year, and I just think, I should be dancing barefoot that the hand of tragedy has passed me by for another year. And I just think I can't really be whinging about the fact that I might have to paint a few paintings, or I mightn't get into an exhibition I really like. Boo hoo.
Yeah, I know. It's so true. That feels really logical, and then somehow, at least I tend to get into that
Mm,
tragic state again every now and then, without
mm,
which is outside of my control. It feels outside of my control, but well,
mm,
because you just said, to me, this is the tortured artist soul, where every year or every month or even every day, you ask yourself what you just said. What am I doing with
mm,
my life? What am I doing with my time? What am I doing with my painting? To me, that's the tortured artist,
mm. Yeah.
because you can't, most of us are never just satisfied just having fun, because because you always follow it up with, yeah, but am I doing anything relevant? Is it,
Mm,
am I doing anything meaningful? Is this even worth my time? I mean, I'm assuming that's what you're talking about to some
mm.
degree.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to me,
And
that's
then
the
you think,
tortured artist
does
part.
it? Yeah. But then, you just think you've got to catch yourself on after a while. I spent a good 2 months at the end of last year just thinking nobody takes me seriously. And then you you get to the end of the year and you just think, to grip, you know, just shake it loose. What's wrong with you, woman? It's about, I don't know. I find that, and it's very easy to slip into that, but I find that usually whenever I head down the let's wallow path, life just sends me like a little excuse me, look over here. Are you really going to complain when this is going on? Are you really going to be so traumatized by something that you actually love doing and you're actually blessed to have the opportunity to do, that
Hmm.
you're going to complain about it? And yeah.
You know, this reminds me of a conversation I just had with my wife this morning, where we were talking about a couple that we know who on Instagram, and this is such a problem nowadays because of Instagram. On Instagram, their life just looks perfect. These are people who we're relatively close to, but they live
Mm,
across the country. So we don't really, it's hard to know what's real, right? Just through Instagram. But when
mm,
you see their Instagram account, it's vacations and family parties, and everyone's always smiling and hugging, and it's birthdays, and everyone always looks beautiful. And it's like, you look at them and it's like they have the perfect life and perfect family. And my
mm.
wife and I were talking about that. Mostly she was. And I thought, yeah, it'd be nice to do some of the vacations they've done. But then it occurred to me, this guy works in an office from 9 to 5, 5 days a week. And he's not
Yeah.
photographing those moments.
Exactly.
You know what I
And
mean? It's
those
like
little
I get to
holidays
stand in
are,
my studio in front of an
yeah.
easel every single day and do what I love to do every day. Boo hoo, I didn't go on that vacation.
But
You know.
it's that whole thing, isn't it? That people go, oh, well deserved and everything's working out for you. And you just think, there was one year I actually just posted the full list of rejections that I had, the sales that didn't happen. And it's like, why am I going to tell you this on Instagram whenever it's a
Of course
it's
you
a
don't.
competitive field? Yeah, nobody's going to turn up and go, never guess what happened to me this really awful year. It's people aren't going to be interested. So you always put your best foot forward. And I think it's damaging in some respects because, yeah, you are thinking that everybody else's life is so much happier than yours. And that's when you need to come off it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, could you imagine? And
But do you
then
not
go
do you
ahead.
not find though that even with, we're talking about the tortured artist thing, and I think part of that feeds into maybe I know it feeds into my practice. There are certain little cycles and processes within it, and
Mm-hmm.
not all of them are healthy or good or worthwhile. but you find yourself getting in those little spaces, and that's okay. That's part of being human. But do you not, more often than not, do you not just catch yourself and just think, this is damn good?
Mm-hmm. You mean the work that you're
Do you
doing?
not, yeah. Do you not
Yeah.
have those little moments of absolute glee where you just think, yes?
Yeah. Sometimes. You know, I mean, you must have the opposite as well, not to keep dragging you down into the dark abyss of artistry, but I mean, for me, it's for me, it's this weird dichotomy where I have this endless confidence where like
Mm,
if that guy can do it or that woman can do it, I can do it. But at the
mm,
same time, I like everyone's work better than mine.
mm,
It's this weird contradiction where you are really insecure that everyone's is better than yours and you wish you painted like Mary, John, and Joe. And yet I feel like, yeah, I can paint good. I'm a good
mm,
painter. It's a weird contradiction. So, yes, I do have those moments like, oh, yeah, I can paint pretty well. But it's rare that I have a moment where I love the way I paint. Like where it's
mm.
like I'm the I'm like the bee's knees. I'm a rock star. That I don't feel very often. Do you get to that place?
No.
Okay, because that's what I thought you were saying. And I'm like, oh man, I'm so jealous.
Very rarely. No, I'm kind of racked with, self-doubt, torture.
Yeah,
Everybody else is better than me. I was looking at your work thinking, oh no.
you see what I mean? And
I
I
mean,
look the same. When I
yeah,
look at your
yeah.
work, I think the same thing. So we're all messed up in the head. But
But you got to find joy in the process,
yeah,
though.
yeah, yeah, that's true. And like I said with that whole Instagram thing, it's just to be able to get up in the morning
Mm,
and do something that you want to do, even if it's a struggle. It's such a blessing.
mm.
I think so anyway. Okay, so I've been dying to look at your work. So let's start looking at your work. Okay, so I'll pull
On
up
the
one.
back of that conversation, now you do this.
No,
Thanks.
no one's gonna be unimpressed with your work. I guarantee it. Okay, so this one is one you posted recently, and it might be
Mm,
the one that was like, okay, I need to go because you've been on my list for a while. I have this long list of artists. There's 8 billion people in the world, so there are a lot of good artists, great artists. So I got this long list, and you've been on it. But when I saw this one, I'm like, all right, it's time to give her a call or give her a message. But this is freaking amazing. I love the paint quality on this thing. And I kind of don't even know what to ask, except for that question that I kind of don't even like, but I I feel like I need to ask it. What are your influences? How did you come across this way of painting where you've got this kind of broken stroke and these really dynamic broken edges and I don't know how else to describe it. It's sort of gritty and raw and yet refined and has volume and form at the same time. Anyway, maybe you could comment on that. That's a pretty wide open question.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think I've talked in podcasts before about um my approach, and this is a guy Spencer who there's a group on Telegram, the Kenyo group, and they post reference photographs for other artists to use.
Hmm.
Most of them are artists themselves. And I'd had this one sitting in the bank for a while, and I just loved the pose. And I thought,
Hmm.
okay, so I've got to do something with this. This is huge compared to my usual scale. So this is 50 by 50 centimeters. And
So
it
that
was only
is, wait, 2.5 centimeters per inch. So what is that, like 20
about
inches or something?
25, yeah, roughly, yeah.
Okay.
So, again, really small scale compared to
Yeah.
compared to your work, the 10-foot pieces. And yeah, so this was only the second time I'd worked on this scale. And I'd been thinking about it so much. And I usually work with kind of keywords. So I knew that I wanted to experiment with layers, that I wanted to look at edges, the hard edge, soft edge, kind of those disrupted elements of the picture, um, and work through a process of, addition and subtraction. So, half of the painting went at one point, and then you kind of build up, but everything that you've painted before leaves traces. So
Hmm.
it's all still part of the process and the final result. Um, yeah, so I threw everything at this one, and yeah, it
Hmm.
was fun to paint until I got to the shirt.
Well, and this, I wanted to ask about this shirt. You know what it reminds me
Mm.
of is a Native American, I don't even know what you'd call it, but some kind of Native American costume or something. I doubt that's what you
Mm.
intended, but that's what it kind
Mm.
of feels like. It's it's really
Mm.
interesting, but I also want to point out for those who haven't read it that this won in the final 50 in the British Art Prize. Congrats on that.
So actually won third prize, which is
No
great.
way. Wow.
Yeah, I know.
Congratulations. That's amazing. Yeah, well
Which
deserved.
is really cool.
So
Yeah.
it almost feels like it could be painted in gouache or acrylic because there's not a lot of blending. It's a lot of broken stroke marks. There is
Mm.
some blending, but it does have that feel of a faster drying medium in a way, which is one of the things I find really interesting about it. Is that just how you're applying the paint, or are you letting it dry in between and building up layers?
The only area that I kind of let dry, and it was mainly just that I had to leave it and walk away for a while because it was driving me crazy, is the whole shirt front. But everything else is alla prima. So,
Really?
yeah, because I work into the surface lots, so I drag the paint, um, and work into it with scalpels and different tools. So I need that alla prima wet surface to get the effects.
Hmm.
And I'll go back and add certain elements on top of it, maybe just little marks. I like, whenever I first started getting into painting, I worked from vintage photographs because I had a big collection. And on vintage photographs, they have scratch marks, that have been maybe little hairs or fragments in the film
Yeah.
during the processing. Bits get bleached or creased or worn. The little photograph that would have been in a suit pocket or in a wallet or whatever. And so these are the types of things that I try and
So
include in
that
my
was one of your
painting.
main inspirations was the natural,
Mm.
what do you call it, imperfections in a old
Mm.
photograph.
Yeah.
No
And
way. That is
yeah,
so
and
cool.
the wear and tear, you just think, I've got pictures of my kids in my purse that have been in there for years as well. And, they've got a little crease, or they've got the little dents or little specks of dust and stuff get in, and
Mm-hmm.
dust in my purse, moths, all those kind of things. But you just think the vintage photographs, because they were kept and prized because that type of imagery wasn't as disposable as it is now. Click
Mm-hmm.
on the phone and you're just like, yeah, that wasn't good, or somebody had their eyes shut and it gets deleted. But given the medium and the expense of the medium, especially in the early days, they were really prized and kept for decades. And there's something really nice about the quality of them, and that's what I wanted to try and get into the paint surface. I
Hmm.
also, whenever I transition from sculpture into painting, there's something about sculpture that it actually takes up a physical space in a room. You have a different relationship with it. And with painting, I used to think that it was a bit boring. And so, it was a static surface. And what I want to try and do within the surface of my work is to create an energy and movement, to have it looking fresh, that, it's not, it's well painted, but it's not labored over, that it still has some energy and dynamism to it. And
Yeah.
yeah,
That's
So
exactly
that's
what
what.
draws me to it. So I see even little places like right here, it's almost like you dripped paint on it. Are you doing that kind of thing too?
So yeah, there's there was a guy, Connor Harrington, and I saw his exhibition many, many years ago, and I looked at his surface. I really hate those paintings where people just think the background is blue and so get one big brush and
Right.
one color of blue. And so within mine, based on Connor's work, it's always stuck with me for all these years, is that every inch of the surface doesn't have to be busy, but it has to work, it has to contribute to the overall painting. So what is the worth of that inch by inch, you
Mm,
know, square? And so I do things like just scratch into it, or I've been introducing colored pencil just to have a different kind of texture and colored edge. There are drips and scrapes, and as I said, I threw everything at this painting,
wow. Almost
and this was
literally
fun.
throwing stuff at the painting.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's so. Are you familiar with Kwang Ho?
No, no.
Oh, you gotta. I also interviewed him. Guy's brilliant.
Hmm.
His wife, Adrienne Stein, who I also interviewed, she calls him the fastest painter in the West. I think he's Vietnamese artist. I mean, he's American now, but he came here when he was a kid. And he did this presentation once at the Portrait Society of America where he talked about how a painting for him is successful if you could zoom in to every inch of the painting and you get a little square abstract painting in every inch. And
Yeah.
when you were talking about that plain blue background, that's what that reminded me of. And as I'm looking at your paintings, I'm trying to imagine, what if I just cut this section out right here? Yeah, that's a abstract painting that's kind of interesting, or this section right here. So I think that's kind of what you're getting at, is that the
Mm,
surface is as important as the imagery.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's all, all got to work together. Oh, I'll definitely check his podcast out
Yeah.
then.
He's
Yeah.
incredible. All right. I'm going to pull out a few more of my favorites. This one's also, maybe it's just cats I like. Let's skip the cat for now. We'll come back to it. Yeah. Is this Warhol?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's written right here. Yeah. Again, gorgeous brushwork. What the heck is this? I love it. Never would have thought to do something like that. What are you stamping it with something? What are these little
Yeah,
circles?
so yeah, so they're the little tubes that cover the tip of your paintbrush to stop it
Are
bending.
you
So
serious?
yeah, I've got a studio full of so many bits of junk because I just think, what happens if you scrape it with that or you drag that, you know?
That's
So I've
awesome.
got
I never
so
would
many
think
bits
to
of
do
junk
something like
lying
that.
about. Mm. And then so that area was painted with, not just, it might look brown, but actually there were reds and blues and everything else in there. And
Mm-hmm.
then scraped back. And then I think I probably had like kitchen roller rag and pressed that on top again so it kind of lifts out certain areas again. So it's about that process of reduction. So rather than having that solid area of color, you let the residues
Mm-hmm.
of what you've painted show through
Yo, I
and
can't.
work with
This
it.
area right in here is so interesting. The just the beautiful arrangement of color. Even just this area right here is just I don't know why I'm getting all giddy over that. It's really cool. These
But
little
that makes
yellow
up for
splash, little pink one. Total. I'm totally nerding out. Only artists would nerd out about something like that. But then the
but
face is painted so beautifully. I love the soft edges on the lips. So what's nice about your work is you have a lot of academic chops, and then you also are a contemporary, a modern painter, and you have modern aesthetics. That's hard for a lot of academic painters. And I'm speaking
Mm.
for myself on some level. You know, it's you're mixing two big strengths together.
Well, it's very flattering indeed, but I think it also depends on your approach, doesn't it? You know,
Yeah.
it's for me this has to be an enjoyable process, and I have to get something out of it. I'm just smiling because those areas are to make up for the disappointment of having to paint a neck. Is there anything more boring than painting a neck?
That is so true. So true. You're the only, I've thought that so many times. I've never heard it said. There's nothing there.
I
Maybe if you
know.
get a good Adam's apple every now and then, something to render, you got an okay Adam's apple right there, but or some good
Yeah.
wrinkles on an older person, maybe some good waddles, you know. But other than that, forget about it.
But also it's about moving your eye around the surface, isn't it? So
Mm-hmm.
that's why I think the little flecks of color are they can keep your eye moving around. You know, we all know the how to structure a painting to, you know, the classical structures, the tried and tested methods, but also it's just those little marks and flecks of color or changing the edge, you know, even like the top of his head.
Yeah.
So there's slightly harder edges in places, and then it just goes all soft, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and blurry until you get back to the harder edge, you know, or even that bit as well on his jawline, just not
Where's
painting
that? Right
right
over
up
here?
to, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that bit. Yeah, see the way there's just a little bit of white.
Right.
So that's just where I haven't painted up to it. That just needed
That's funny you
that
should mention
different.
that because I was also silently geeking out about that decision too. Because that's not, it's that's it. That is what separates an academic from an artist. Making decisions that aren't necessarily predictable. They're not part of the academic process. They're not part of creating a form or creating an image. They're or creating or replicating an image. They're just simply design, aesthetics, taste, where it's just like, oh, there needs to be a little white spot right there. I was totally geeking out over that.
Yeah, I have this conversation with my daughter all the time, and you know she likes drawing, and you know is very creative, and you know very good for her age. But there's something about I always say to her, "That's your artist's eye." You know, whenever she looks at something or does something a certain way, I'll say, "Not everybody sees that.
Mm-mm.
That's your artist's eye," and she does have it, and it's not until you kind of see it in someone else that you think it is a certain way of seeing. And I could have painted right up to that side of the face, but for me, that wasn't right. It wouldn't have looked right. That needed that little bit of space around it.
Do you think that's innate, or can the artist's eye, as you put it, be taught?
Oh, that's a tricky one, isn't it? I just think the practice of art should be for everybody
Mm-hmm.
because I think it is a joyful and rewarding experience when it's gone well.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something that everybody should have the opportunity to get involved in. But I think there are certain things that you either that you have or you don't. And also, yeah, that's tricky though, because I think actually I spend so many hours in the studio. People always say, "Oh, you know, how did you learn to do that?" And it's like, well, if you go to the studio 5 days a week, you know, year in, year out for 10 years, then you'll discover something as well, you know, you'll develop a shorthand or a way of looking, um, your own visual language. And so I think from that, yeah, it's tricky though. I'm going to
It is
contradict
tricky.
myself in the space of one sentence, but I think sometimes you either have it or you don't, and then at other times you can develop a language that maybe holds something different.
Yeah.
Is that sitting on the fence enough for you?
No, you're exactly where I am, and that is confused about it. At least that's what I'm getting from you. I mean, because it is complex. So I've been teaching for 22 years, 22 years this year privately,
Mm,
and I've had so many students, and I don't care what anyone says, and it coincidentally this came up in the last podcast too, so it might get redundant, but I don't care what anyone says. There is such a thing as talent. I mean, after teaching 22 years, there are people that get it quickly, and there are people that it's just hard for them. It's just really hard. Now, that's not to say that not anyone can learn it, but there are some people that
mm,
it just comes that painting. I'm not talking about the artist's eye yet, but just painting, just
mm,
all of the things that go into making art come easy, and that's what I
mm,
define as talent, where it just comes easier for that person. So can other people learn it? Of course. But the artist's eye to me is a different thing. And I've said this on the podcast before, but I'll say it to you. When I was a kid, my dad could build anything. I mean, I learned how to use tools from my dad. He's got an engineering brain that's brilliant. But everything he built, I could tell from a little kid that he didn't. I just remember like it was yesterday starting to realize that my dad didn't have a sense of aesthetics that was terribly strong. Like everything was beautifully built. The finish was perfect.
mm,
Like the joinery was perfect. It was so well built. It would never fall apart, never come up. I mean, he's brilliant, but it was always a
mm.
little off in its design, balance, color choices,
Yeah.
proportion. You know what I mean? And even as a little kid, I remember thinking there's something wrong with his sense of design, proportion. You know, and I
Mm,
would ask him about it on occasion, respectfully, like, Dad, are you sure this is supposed to be that way? And at that point, it occurred to me that there is a genetic component to it. But then
mm,
I've also seen students learn it. But I've never
mm,
been able to, maybe says more about my weakness than my students' weakness, but I've never been able to figure out a way to teach an artist's eye. You can teach formulas, you can teach principles of
mm.
design, but what principle design is going to say leave a little white space right there? What principle? Like give me I mean there is no such principle. What principle is going to say put a spattering of little scratches on the side here? There's no there's
Mm,
no principle. And so I've never been able to teach it, but I have seen some students come with it and it comes easily and their paintings are great really early on, and then I've seen people slowly acquire somewhat of an artistic eye.
mm,
So I think I don't know, but I think it can be learned. But some people just have
mhm.
it and they have it in spades and it just gets stronger with time. And that's my feeling on it.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually, isn't it? It's it's hard to pinpoint what exactly it is, but even you as a 12-year-old knew that something was off, even if you even if you wouldn't necessarily have been able to have broken it down and described exactly what was off so that it could be remedied. You just still knew that it was off.
Right.
Uh, I think, but do you not find, let's sidetrack a little bit. Do you not find that things like that, you have that view on things in life in general, that you will spot things or you will notice things that other people won't?
I do know this, and I think it's connected. I am personally consumed with my surroundings always being beautiful and aesthetically inspiring. So if I'm sitting in my backyard and there is chaos that's not attractive in front of me, maybe my son brought in the garbage cans and he put them away in some stupid position that is such an eyesore. My wife can just sit and relax. I can't. I can't relax. And she just sits there and she's like, just leave the garbage cans. I'm like, I can't. I gotta fix the garbage cans. I mean, we could have guests over, and I'm going over there right in the middle of a conversation. I just noticed the garbage can. I gotta go fix the garbage cans. It's like an obsession. And I think that there is a type, I don't know, this might be my narcissism and thinking that maybe that's unique to me. And maybe it's more anxiety than noticing. But I think that there are certain types of people who literally find peace and happiness in visual stimulation. There are certain people that visual stimulation is what drives them. It's like the energy that makes them function from day to day. And I feel like that's my curse in a way, that everything has to be just right or I can't function properly. And it carries into my work because, of course, it needs to be just right. It needs to be designed well. It needs, in my opinion, of course, it needs to be stimulating visually, not just a picture of something. So, well, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Is that crazy out in left field?
You know what? I'm just glad you said it first, because that's exactly the route that I was going to go down. I
Oh,
think
really?
you were just a lot more eloquent than I was going to be. But yeah, I was just going to say it's a blessing and a curse, and seeing the little things, and like I said, we're renovating a house at the minute, and so I see all the things that are wrong. My wife's like, it's absolutely fine. What are you looking at now? And it's just like, can you not see that that runs off slightly? Or, we had a
Yes.
carpenter in, and he has nail heads that he hasn't, countersunk and knocked in properly. And I just think that's all I can see on the door. You know,
Yes.
I've got this beautiful door frame put in that we waited half a year to to be able to get to the point where we were doing that bit of DIY. And it's just like, that's all I can see now. So yeah, I totally get the bins.
And do you think that's related to this personal, what did we call it? Artistic eye? Do you think the
Mm,
artistic eye is the same trait that makes you and I kind of anxious, crazy people when with our surroundings?
yes.
You do think it's the same thing? Yeah, I think so too. All right, let's go back to your work. Let's see. So, okay, well, let's look at cats again. Another great one. Is this from the same reference photos?
Yeah, so this was Randy. He was on the KNU site as well. And
Hmm.
yeah, it was just, I don't know, I was wanting to experiment a little bit more with introducing other elements into the paintings. I think because I'd worked so heavily, and this was quite a while ago, so I think that actually it was maybe around the time that I was using the Kenyo reference bank a bit more heavily, because of, I think it might have been pandemic time.
Hmm.
Um, and actually, so I enjoy working from photographs, and I know it has its limitations, but I really enjoy all those little
Not
bits
with
of
do you think it
color
really has
and
limitations though with the way you're working? Because you're parting so
mm,
far from the photo that I
I
feel
mean,
like I mean, what limitations does it really have? I mean, I don't mean to argue with you. I know that
mm,
that is the go-to phrase and we all say it, but
mm,
take first, photography is so good now. And secondly, you depart from the photographic reference so much. What do you
mm.
perceive to be the limitations?
I don't know. I think one of the limitations is that I think it comes from having a background in sculpture, is that I can't just poke my head right and see how his nose actually sits on his face,
Oh, fair enough. Okay.
or
Yeah.
those little things that give you an understanding of the shape that you're trying to paint.
Hmm.
And I think
So you
this
paint
is
more
why
conceptually then. You're not copying, copying is the wrong word. You're not observing and replicating shape patterns. You're thinking more sculpturally and trying to understand forms when you're painting.
I think there's an element of that, but I think also my work is really concerned with the surface.
Mm,
So how does the surface behave? And what does the surface tell you about this, the actual shape of that lip or that chin?
right.
Or, and how do you, um, I haven't really painted animals before. And the idea of painting fur, oof, wasn't that attractive to me. So it's like, I want to paint this cat because I liked this composition. I liked the expression on you know, on both their faces. So how was I going to work that? Was I going to sit and try and paint every little wisp of fur? No, I was not. So
Hmm.
how do I work that surface to describe the cat, describe its fur, describe how its body is being held? And so it was, for me, for me it depends on what the challenge is, what the area of interest is. And for me, it wasn't about painting fur, it was conveying the idea of that animal
Hmm.
and its shape and its presence within that
Well,
space.
you definitely made it look like, well, look like fur, maybe not the right way to put it, but it has that fur quality to it. It feels different than his
But
skin for sure.
mm, but then that was another example of, I'd been painting it. It was a lot more detailed and a lot more worked up than it is at the minute. And if you look close enough, you'll see that half of it has just been removed. I just scraped it off.
Wait, where
And
has
so
it been
you just
removed?
left.
Like, oh,
So
right
if
here.
you're to, yeah, yeah. So lots of that went. But also on the paw and leg that's sticking out. So that was just scraped back.
Huh.
So you
Yeah,
just
these
left
are,
with
so
the
there's a lot of
traces.
thin paint on this, like a lot of down to the panel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see some impasto moments, but how often do you really build it up or don't you? Or you stay relatively thin?
Not so much. I mean, this one is particularly thin.
Mm,
Um, but I wanted that almost kind of bleached out look of a photograph, you know, of the kind
yeah,
of Polaroids.
you captured that.
I mean, but the image itself wasn't bleached out. But I'd been looking and thinking about Polaroids and think, what
Hmm.
do what do Polaroids offer that different photographs don't, or that paintings don't? There's that funny color that you get, especially, the 70s and 80s, the Polaroid. Oh no. Yeah, 70s photographs, but it was probably more 80s, wasn't it?
I think that was like the 80s. It wasn't the
Mhm.
90s for sure. I think it
No,
was like the
no.
80s. Yeah. So
Mm.
that's one thing that you've said that I really find interesting because, people have mixed feelings on working from photos. I went 14 years without working from photos because I wanted to, for various reasons, I wanted to push myself, challenge myself, try and see if I could do things if I were born 300 years earlier, just personal challenges, And
Mm.
that was it. It wasn't like photos are bad, so I'm not using them, nothing like that. And now I do use photos again, but I'm using
Mm.
photos and I'm doing, more classical type work. I'm mimicking, I'm trying to mimic people like Rembrandt or Solomon J. Solomon and Waterhouse and things like that, or people like that. And but I'm using modern. I guess Waterhouse doesn't really count because he used photography too. But I'm using modern techniques to do that. But you're doing what seems more pure in a way to me because you're using modern tools, not just to do the painting. You're actually inspired by the modern tool. Your style is literally being informed by old photographs and their scratches and dusts and imperfections, and in this case, Polaroids. So why
Mm.
wouldn't you paint from photos? It's like it's your inspiration, and it feels appropriate
Mm.
for some reason to me
Mm.
to do that. Whereas mine, I'm using a
Mm.
contemporary method to mimic the old masters. It doesn't feel quite as linear as what you're doing. I really like what you're doing.
But also yours makes sense though. I mean, surely Rembrandt, if he had a camera and was able to, photograph his models, and I don't know if you manipulate it on, I don't know,
On Photoshop,
whatever packages.
not
Yeah, I
much.
mean,
No, not much.
mm. So actually, I think yours is a harder leap because you're taking something, so you're having like a reference image, something to work off, but actually you have to employ so much artistic license, imagination, skill, all that information that you've stored up from looking at Rembrandts and studying them, never mind your own kind of practical skills and the development they've had to go through over the years. That's a really big leap, as far as
Hmm.
I can see, from taking that photograph to completely flipping the whole the whole process, the whole viewing experience on its head to create something else.
Hmm. We
That
should
just
do
blows my
podcasts
mind.
weekly because I'll just tell you how awesome you are, and you can tell me what I'm doing is awesome, and
Ah,
it'll
God.
help us get through our weeks. Yeah, well, I appreciate you saying that. That's nice of you.
But sometimes, do you not just think it sounds like, you know, you can develop your practice and find ways of working, and actually sometimes you just get so close to them that you can't actually see what is interesting about it from anyone else's point of view, because you're just bang right up so
Oh,
close to
totally
it.
feel that way. I
But
think I
if
understand what you're
somebody else
saying.
was doing that, you'd be like, oh wow, that's fantastic.
Well, I get to a point, and this goes to what we were saying earlier, or what I was telling you earlier, especially after a year on something, or even close to that, where you get so close to it that I'll have a show and show it in my studio, and I'm looking at people staring at the painting, and and I'm so insecure about it because I'm so unbelievably bored of the image that I've become so accustomed to that I don't know if it's interesting or not. I can't get outside of my own
Mm.
body and see it objectively. I'm not sure. I mean, I planned for it to be and I followed the plan, so I trust that it might be. So yes, I think that's what you're saying. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but isn't it nice when everything's actually got a plan though?
Yes.
So much of my work, I actually look at it and I just think that's nothing like what I had hoped for.
Yeah, but the way you work,
Sometimes it works out better,
it
but
doesn't
yeah,
sound like planning is appropriate for your process as much as it is for mine.
true.
I mean, because I think if you planned the way I planned, it would be a disservice to your work. What is beautiful about your work is the spontaneity, the quick decisions, maybe not quick, but spontaneous decisions, the unexpected decisions.
Mm.
That's one of the things that makes it beautiful. I want to make one more comment about it. So I've done lots of portraits where I incorporate abstraction too.
Mm.
And what I really like about what you're doing that I don't feel like I've done as well is that when you are doing these abstract backgrounds, you're making very subtle decisions. Just little changes in hue, little changes in value
Mm.
that really, I mean, if you squint down, it's almost just a plain blue background, but it's not. It's still got a lot of interest to it. And I find it tempting when I'm doing something more abstract to be a little too garish and too loud in order to say, look what I'm doing. It's abstract and it's funky and it's cool and it's, you know what I mean? Where you're being controlled and reserved in this work.
But sometimes it's those quieter moments where you get that satisfaction. That's why I look at it. There's some times within a painting that I just think, really like that little bit. That bit really worked well. And nobody else is going to see it on a little Instagram square.
Yeah.
But you can look at those bits and think, really like that. I must remember how I thought of that and how I made that happen within that painting. You must get that yourself.
Oh
And
yeah.
but you look at the rest of the painting and you think, ugh.
Yeah, definitely felt both of those things. Now this one's really interesting because you really had to be reserved. I mean, you've basically eliminated color except for a few little splashes. I
Mm,
mean, to some degree, I guess I see subtle temperature shifts here and there, but it's generally a black and white face.
mm.
But then you've got just a few little splashes of color. What was your concept going into that? Was that the concept? I'm going to do a black and white face with just subtle color variation, or did you have something else in mind?
Well, I'd been thinking about photographs again, and I don't know if you've ever seen uh, the work of Francis Bacon.
Yeah.
He took lots of, well, of course, sorry, no Francis Bacon, but he used to have photographs and images in his studio. And so they had like the little thumb marks of color around the edges, maybe, or a little splatter of a bit of color that didn't necessarily relate to that photograph, but it was just in the studio and in the firing line of
Yeah.
whatever he was
Okay.
up to. Um, and so I like that idea of little bits of color that maybe come from something else, being part of something else while
Huh.
this image was lying around.
It makes so much sense when you tell me what your inspiration is, but I never would have thought of it. So you literally
Mm.
just saw a dirty photograph and you're painting a painting inspired by a dirty
Mm.
photograph.
Mm. And then photographers, whenever you get the contact sheet and
Mm-hmm.
you're choosing which photograph you're going to work from, so lots of the times there'll just be a big X through the ones that they're
What?
not going to work from, and you can just about see it, but I've put a big X through it,
Yeah, you can totally
right
see
through the
it.
center of the photograph.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh my
but that was
gosh.
just something that I liked from something else, so I've kind of cobbled it all together and put it into
Huh.
this one.
It's really cool to hear where people get their inspiration. It's so varied. All
Mm.
right, I'm just gonna look at a couple more here. Oh, this one's really cool. So are these some of the ones that you
Mm.
sell for relatively inexpensive in order to kind of get your name out there?
Yeah, yeah. So they're really small. They'd fit into the palm of your hand. So they're 5 by 10 centimeters.
Hmm.
Um, and I mean, working on that scale is really my happy place.
Is it really?
There's, yeah, there's something about, so this would be painted in kind of one sitting. So a day in the studio from start to finish. Um, and I really like working on this scale because not only do you have to get all the information down about the skin, the shape of the nose, the texture of the hair, all this kind of stuff. Not only if you get that in such a small space and make it look good, you also then have to work the surface and give it energy and bring it past the point of just being a painting of a photograph.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I bleached the bottom out. Remember how photographs would look at the end of a strip? Sometimes you get that bleaching at the
Oh
end of
yeah.
a roll, that kind of thing. Um, yeah, and I like this, and I like the challenge of working on this scale because you have to be really decisive, and if you don't get it right, it really shows up because there's nowhere else to go. There's not a massive big background to put a vase of flowers or something, or a scene in. You've just got it is what it is, and you have
Mm-hmm.
to make that work. So I find that fun.
Yeah, that scale looks like a lot of fun. I love these little hairs on his chin that kind of
Mm.
look like they were done the same way that you did the scratches throughout the picture.
Yeah, it's just a little scalpel blade.
Yeah, very cool. Oh, here's another great one. This one's a little bit larger, I'm assuming.
Yeah, so that's 15 by 20. So a
Yeah,
little bit
beautiful
bigger.
work.
Mm.
Well, this has been a blast. So, if you've heard the podcast before, then you probably know what my final question is. And that is what advice would you give an aspiring artist that, well, you said earlier, you wished you had advice. You didn't really get advice in college. So I was going to say that you had, but
Mm.
that you wished you had.
I just think it ties in a bit to that of being that tortured artist, doesn't it? I just think you need to do your thing. So get in and work. Um, Even the days whenever you don't feel like working, just get in and do something, even if it's just tidying your space. But always be working. Um, Always be looking. But if you don't have that self-belief, then just find other people who believe in you, hang around with them, and fake it a little bit.
Yeah,
I just think I spent too much time. I mean, I still do it now. It's an active part of my day, not believing in myself, not feeling confident about what you're working on. We've covered this already, but all those things are part of my day. But if you don't believe in yourself, why would anybody else? So you've got to find something that either you believe in or that other people can believe in, and then you can ride off the back of that until you readjust your vision.
that's good advice. Well, Ange, it's been a pleasure. As you know, I'm a huge fan, so it's an honor to get to know you a little bit better. Maybe someday, can't imagine I'll be in Ireland anytime soon, but if you're ever in the United States, I'd love to meet you someday in person.
Well, it's been such a treat. I'm been deeply flattered. My ego has been well and truly inflated. Thank you, Jeff.
Same here.
But
Thanks.
but I'm such a fan of your work, and now that I've discovered your podcast, well, you'll be keeping me company in the studio for quite a few hours to come.
Thanks for tuning in to the Undraped Artist Podcast. If you enjoyed it, subscribe. And if you could, leave a comment or review. That really helps the channel. Please share the show with your friends, and if you're feeling generous, consider a monthly donation at theundrapedartist.com. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next week.